So what are the arguments that you make when you get to the White House about the issues that you've raised about South Africa? Is it expropriation? Are you also of the belief that there is a genocide of white farmers in South Africa?
Is the element of international support, international recognition. And if you're going to establish a new country, the second part of that component is you need to know that other countries are going to welcome you into the international community. You must bear in mind that South Africa and the ANC in particular are great outspoken proponents of the right for self-determination. I mean, how many times have you heard South Africa, the South African government and the ANC calling for a two-state solution in the Middle East based upon the Palestinians' right to self-determination? The Western Cape people also have a right to self-determination, and all we want to...
Guys, South Africa seems to be on the brink of suicide. It appears that the nation is about to destroy itself from within. So Phil Craig is actually preparing to take the call for the Cape independence to the White House in the same like as AfriForum and Solidarity. And this is actually in support, especially of what Prince Mashele argued in my last video, that the likes of these private groups, the likes of AfriForum, Solidarity, would not be the end. We're going to keep seeing more and more fighting for their own group, so to speak, rights, because of how unsafe and how unprotected they feel in an ANC, so to speak, led, environment or space, so to speak. But although now we have the GNU, but yet there are still these kinds of groups rising. South Africa is really boiling. So this heated interview, bro, it's really, even for me, I'm really shocked at the things I'm hearing from Phil Craig. So the bottom line anyway is that he argues that if South Africa, especially the fact that the ANC is so passionate at pushing for two-state solutions and fight for self-determination for other states, in that it supports Palestine, it supports the Western Sahara, then the Western Cape itself, especially this Cape Independence Advocacy Group, has the right to also push for a two-state solution for South Africa, and it wants to approach the White House to begin to push for support for a referendum to test the democratic capacity of the potential of the Western Cape to secede from the Union of South Africa. And after that kind of like test is done in form of a referendum, then we might understand and know if probably we will see a South Africa with a seceded Western Cape or not. It's getting really hot. Let's quickly listen to this really emotional. You just hold yourself onto your seat, bro. It's really emotional. But it's an interview between this newsroom journalist and Phil Craig. Really battle these thoughts as Phil Craig really continues to push for the necessity, according to him, that the way South Africa is going, there's really probably no other way than a pattern of secession, and that the Western Cape, especially this Cape Independence Advocacy Group, will be part of the first to really push for that. Let's listen to this interview, and I'll be back for a few thoughts.
Welcome back. So the Cape Independence Advocacy Group says it intends to send a delegation to the United States. This is where it will raise funds and garner diplomatic support for its campaign to have an independent Western Cape. The group says it has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as the DIRCO minister. Well, let's speak now to Phil Craig, who is with the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Phil, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You've written to the president, Ronald Lamola, as well as the Western Cape Premier, to say what exactly?
Just to, in the first instance, just to inform them that we're intending to go to the United States and that we're going to lobby there for Cape independence. We've taken legal advice. We've always been an organisation that stayed within the bounds of the Constitution and is pushing for Cape independence democratically, peacefully, and legally. So we're about to go to the US, and the advice we received, and I thought it was sensible advice, is look, let's let's not do anything underhand. We'll put our cards on the table. We'll be very transparent in what we're doing. And we've written to those, the president, the premier, and the minister of DIRCO, and we've said, look, we believe we have the right to do this. We intend to do this, but in the spirit of fair play, we're going to give you full notice, and we're inviting you to make any representations if you believe that we're not entitled to do this.
Okay, but let's talk about this, though, because this is intending to go to the White House and travel to Washington, D.C. to advocate for the secession of the Western Cape?
Well, so to advocate for support for our campaign, in the first instance, a referendum to be held in the Western Cape to test the democratic will of the Western Cape people. So we have to understand that the Western Cape people are not being governed according to their democratic will. They have a right to self-determination, both under the South African Constitution and in international law. The Constitution allows for a referendum to test democratically whether the Western Cape people would like to secede from South Africa. And at the moment, the Western Cape Premier, despite evidence that suggests the majority of people may well be in favour of secession, is deliberately blocking and refusing to call a referendum. So in the first instance, what we want to do is we want to see democracy followed, and we'd like to see a referendum held in the Western Cape to test the democratic will of the Western Cape people, and that would be the start of the process. And we're looking for support to allow us to campaign more vociferously that both financial support and perhaps even more important, diplomatic support and pressure onto the Western Cape government to ensure that the Western Cape Premier doesn't stand in the way of democracy.
Guys, first of all, I just want to understand. So the Premier of the Western Cape, I would think would be Alan Winder, or probably another one anyway. But these are DA officials, so to speak. So in other words, Phil Craig, this Cape Independence Advocacy Group, is in a sort of like a clash with the DA's leadership in the Western Cape. And it's almost like a movement to take the Western Cape out of the DA. So in other words, are we beginning to see a scenario whereby the DA itself would be the one to fight for the Cape independence now that the DA is in the GNU? Or would the DA stay silent and these guys go to the US, to the White House again, to kind of like get support for its movement in a province where the DA itself, which is a member of the Government of National Unity, is actually in a leadership? It's just like it's a mess. It's really something that I really don't know. And what's really significant here is that he argues that the majority of the people living in Western Cape would actually support us kind of like a secession. So in other words, this might actually be signifying, so to speak, a low-key coup against the DA and the DA's leadership in the Western Cape. So we see that a lot of this is just danger brewing in South Africa. Let's keep on listening to this interview.
So as you campaign for the secession of the Western Cape, why take this though to the White House? So what role would Donald Trump's administration play?
Well, so look, secession is a relatively a complicated affair, and effectively it has two legs, and it always has two legs. One of those two legs is domestic, and that is, what do the people who are wishing to secede want? What is their democratic will, and how have you tested that? And that's done through a referendum typically, and the South African and Western Cape constitutions provide for that. And then the second leg is the element of international support, international recognition. And if you're going to establish a new country, the second part of that component is you need to know that other countries are going to welcome you into the international community and recognize your right to exist as a country. So as a matter of course, we would have been in any case attending to those two legs. Clearly, there's been a change in the sort of the global order, and we now have a new administration in the US that's much more outspoken in its criticism of the South African government, something that we've been outspoken spoken about for a number of years, and obviously are therefore much more likely to be aligned with the views and the ideas that we're trying to oppose. This would be a natural engagement that would take place and has taken place in the past, but this obviously probably is one that's much more significant.
So what are the arguments that you make when you get to the White House about the issues that you've raised about South Africa? Is it expropriation? Are you also of the belief that there is a genocide of white farmers in South Africa, as has been put forward by other bodies that have traveled to the White House? And do you believe that is misinformation, or do you believe that those are true facts?
So Cape Independence is not ethnically driven at all, and it's absolutely not about white people. The white population of the Western Cape is the smallest of the three racial groups, and Cape Independence is about the democratic will of the Western Cape people as a whole, and obviously that's made up that the largest ethnic group in the Western Cape is the coloured people, then black people, and then the last of all are white people. So this has nothing to do with any claim of white genocide. This is simply about the Western Cape people having a right to self-determination. And of course, we must bear in mind that South Africa and the ANC in particular are great outspoken proponents of the right for self-determination. I mean, how many times have you heard South Africa, the South African government and the ANC calling for a two-state solution in the Middle East based upon the Palestinians' right to self-determination? And effectively, this is just quid pro quo. Here we are, the Western Cape people also have a right to self-determination, and all we want to see is the South African government and the ANC being just as keen to promote our right to self-determination as they are for the Palestinians and Western Saharans and other groups. This has got nothing to do with genocide at all. This has got everything.
That's quite the comparison to make, Phil, when you consider the fact that in the Middle East you have a war that has been raging for decades, and of late, in the past 17 months, has claimed tens of thousands of lives. Can you clearly say that the Western Cape's right to self-determine can be argued based on the argument of self-determination being made in the Middle East? How is that comparison fair when some of our viewers are listening to it?
Well, it's very fair because international law, which South Africa has signed up to and is subject to, and a number of international treaties which South Africa has signed since 1994 make it absolutely clear that all people have the right to self-determination. So nobody gets to pick and choose who has the right to self-determination. And ultimately, what does the UN itself say? It's, well, self-determination is a fundamental component of democracy. And we have this situation in the Western Cape where the majority of people have never once voted for the ANC and have never once since 1994 been governed according to the democratic will. So the Western Cape people don't have functional democracy. They're not being governed according to the democratic will. And if they exercise their right to self-determination, they will be able to be governed according to the democratic will. And surely most fair-minded people will be able to see, well, hang on a second, this is perfectly reasonable for a group of people to say we want to be governed in accordance with how we voted, and we have this right, this absolute undeniable right in international law, which our government promotes on a regular basis, and we'd like to exercise that right by holding a referendum in accordance with the South African and Western Cape constitutions, peacefully, legally, democratically. And we know from past polling that about 70% of people in the Western Cape believe their lives would fundamentally improve in an independent Western Cape, and are absolutely certain they're right. This is about creating jobs, about creating a stronger economy, about lifting people out of poverty and creating a fairer society and a better life for all the people in the Western Cape. So this is a laudable, democratic, peaceful aim that's geared towards improving the lives of all the people in the Western Cape and getting them out from under a national government that the majority of them have never once voted for.
Well, but you do have a Western Cape that, out of all 9 provinces, is and has been held by the Democratic Alliance for a long time, as per the will of the electorate. So is that to say that our very elections are null and void in your view? And why then have you not run in elections in last year's provincial and national elections and then garnered the support that you need to then argue the case? The DA that has the majority in the Western Cape certainly doesn't hold the view that you do.
Well, look. So first of all, we have to understand the system of government. We've got effectively a unitary state. We've got a quasi-federal unitary state in South Africa, which means that we may have a Western Cape government or a DA government in the Western Cape, but the majority of decisions, the important decisions, who runs the economy, who sets labour law, who runs transport, who sets the budget, that we've seen, and that's the national government. And actually, the provincial government has relatively little powers. So this is about saying, okay, this system of government that we have, which we started in 1990, isn't working for the West. We can look back now. We've got 30 years of history, and we can see, as a matter of absolute fact, that the majority of people in the Western Cape are not being governed according to their democratic will. And actually, we're perfectly within our rights, and it's perfectly sensible in the current circumstances to say, look, let's have a look at it. Let's try a different system of government because we're going to be better off. So, of course, now, ironically, I was involved in a political party. I lead the referendum party, and we did put up a party, and that's one of our strategic acts that we have undertaken, because ultimately we are trying everything we can to force the Western Cape government to consult the Western Cape people democratically, because we know from polling that the majority are in favour, and we know that the majority of DA's own voters are in favour, but the Premier of the Western Cape is adamant that he's not going to call a referendum on Cape independence, despite knowing that the majority of voters in the province favour one, and that's undemocratic, and we will use whatever means we can, and all of them, to try and force the Premier of the Western Cape to be democratic and allow the Western Cape people to be heard on this issue, whether that's putting up a political party, whether that's lobbying, and whether that's going to the US. We will do all of those things because we're determined that we are going to have a democratic solution which allows the Western Cape people to be consulted on this issue as provided for in the South African Constitution.
You're going to have a democratic process that you say forces a democratically elected premier to listen to your campaign. Let me ask you this, Phil. The campaign that you say you've written to the president, to DIRCO minister, and to the premier to alert them that you have the intention of sending a delegation to the US to meet with Trump administration officials to let them know about your campaign. Your campaign is for the secession of the Western Cape. Does your campaign have resources? Are you traveling to the US to ask for resources? So is this about funding for your campaign?
No, so there's more than one aim and objective, but of course we're going to ask for funding. We've been absolutely transparent in writing to the Premier. That is one of the things that we'll look to do to raise funds in the US as we're allowed to do, so that we can carry out a more effective campaign here in the Western Cape. We know from polling from repeated polling over a number of years that the majority of people favour the holding of a referendum. And actually, we need to bring about as much political pressure in a democracy, because a democracy is a contest of ideas, to force the Western Cape Premier to listen to the Western Cape people on this issue. And that's laudable, it's democratic, and we've got absolutely nothing to be ashamed of that. We should be applauded for that. We're trying to improve the lives of the Western Cape people, all of the Western Cape people. And if we're successful, their lives are going to get fundamentally better.
AfriForum now facing what looks like maybe a legal battle with the MK party moving forward, as the MK party has gone to court and laying charges of treason against AfriForum. AfriForum having traveled to the US to, and I don't want to use the word force, but let's say persuade the US government to persuade South Africa to go back on its expropriation bill. So asking another government to ask our government to do one lobby group's will. Would you see what AfriForum has done as treason, as the MK party puts forward?
No, absolutely not. And did anybody see it as treason when the ANC lobbied internationally to bring an end to apartheid? That's part of the democratic process. Welcome to the real world. There's absolutely no issue with that. We all have, the Constitution allows for freedom of expression. You're allowed to share ideas. You're allowed to advocate for your ideas. You're allowed to raise funds domestically and abroad, and there are rules around that, and we all must stay within the rules. But actually, what MK is doing is just cheap politics. And I think one of the frustrations that we've got, and I think we've seen it, is one of the issues that we're sitting with in South Africa, is that there's a certain political persuasion that has anointed itself as the morally superior part of society. And people who are arguing for it are often, called racist, called treasonous, and constantly subject to threats. Well, actually, it's a democracy, and within the confines of the law, people are entitled to motivate for ideas. That's what it's supposed to be about. And if we've got rights in the Constitution, we're allowed to exercise those rights in the Constitution. I think what MK is doing is absolutely disgraceful. I think AfriForum were perfectly within their rights to go to the US, as are we. But actually, here we are. We couldn't possibly be more transparent. We've said we're going to go. We've written to the president, the premier, and the minister. We've said, this is what we're going to go. This is what we're going to ask for. We don't think we've got any issue here. We're not asking your permission. But we are notifying you, and we have given you 7 days to raise any objections that you feel you may have so that we can consider those. And that then means that there's no lack of transparency on our side. And if the government really believes that this is anti-democratic and treasonous, which I don't think for 1 second it does, then we've given it the opportunity to say so. So either it must put up or shut up.
What is the price for the campaign? You say you've made it quite obvious and clear and been transparent about the fact that you are also traveling to the US to ask for funding. What is the cost of a campaign that looks to secede the Western Cape? What does that look like?
Well, look, so I'm not going to put a price tag onto that at this point in time, and I think a lot of that depends. I mean, at its very basic level, if the Western Cape Premier is willing to call a referendum, then we're just talking about a basic marketing campaign from both sides. And in a democracy, there should be one side that's campaigning for the Leave vote, the other side that's campaigning for the Remain vote, and those two campaigns should be equally balanced. But at this point in time, I'm not going to get into the details of exactly what we're going to ask for. I think what we're doing now, we've been transparent. We've said we're going to go. We're going to engage the US. We've told the media. We've told the president. We've told the premier. We've put our cards on the table. And I don't think anybody has any right to any grievance towards us. Here we are talking to you now, saying, yeah, look, we've got nothing to hide whatsoever. This is what we're going to do.
And you haven't told the White House as yet?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
You haven't told the White House as yet?
So at this point in time, we haven't finalised the arrangements for the US. Of course, we've some time ago started to make some arrangements, but absolutely nothing has been finalised. This is a genuine good faith letter. We know broadly when we're going to go, which will be next month. And before we do, the first step in the process, we took legal advice, said, look, okay, this is what we're planning to do. Are there any issues? The legal advice said, no, it's not. But what we would recommend is before you go, that you write to the government and put your cards on the table. We said, fine, we're happy with that legal advice. That's exactly what we've done. And then once this 7 days has expired, then we'll move ahead full steam and put our plans in place.
Yeah, I think I'm going to let you go, but I want to just throw one question at you, if you'd allow me. I don't know if you've looked at South Africa's constitution, but one of the things that it talks about is South Africa belonging to all those who live in it. Is that something that you believe in?
Well, yes, I do, but the same goes for the Western Cape and for other regions. And let me throw one back to you. Have you read, for example, Section 235 of the Constitution that clearly says, apart from the Western Cape the South African people as a whole have a right to self-determination, but that doesn't preclude other groups from also claiming a right to self-determination to which they're entitled. So it's very easy to cherry pick parts of the Constitution. The Constitution is founded on non-racialism, but actually I'm the author of the only non-racialism bill that we've got in South Africa, because we've got 142 race laws, despite the Constitution saying we're founded on non-racialism. So it's very easy to pick and choose the parts of the Constitution that you like. Ultimately, what we want to do is perfectly legal, democratic, and it's actually a fundamental human right. That's the important thing. Self-determination isn't some dirty word. It's a fundamental human right that's created for exactly the situation that the people of the Western Cape find themselves in, trapped in a country where the majority of people don't think like we do, and it doesn't matter how we keep voting, we keep getting into government that isn't the one that we voted for, and self-determination is the right that allows us to get out of that system and to chart our own course.
All right. Phil Craig, thank you so much.